Next ones I want to go over are our upper body strengthening exercises. So we've got our chest press, horizontal abduction, biceps, triceps, shoulder flexion, and shoulder abduction. So again, we can use our TheraBand for our resistance. A lot of the time when we're doing shoulders especially, I do like to start with yellow, making sure that the movement doesn't have any compensations, which we'll go over with some of them, before I increase the resistance. So TheraBand actually works really well for the upper body just because I can secure it with one hand while the other hand moves. You can also use either a dumbbell free weight or an ankle weight, which you can just secure around your wrist. So it is a little bit large because it's also an ankle weight. So just being aware that that's going to be harder to make tight enough to not fall off, but it is a possibility depending on what you have available. Also, when we have weakness in one side, that means that we can't necessarily lift our arm up as high. We can use a rod, a dowel of any kind. You can use a cane, whatever you have, to be able to help with that one hand or arm that doesn't necessarily have the strength. This isn't necessarily like pushing if it's painful. If it's still painful, even with the dowel helping, you still don't want to push into that. Otherwise, it's more like if you have weakness because of, say, a stroke, this is a good way to be able to still get some strength in that arm, having the arm doing some of the movement, but helping out with the other. So I'll show you those as we go. So the first one we're going to be doing is our chest press. So this one we're going to start with our arms kind of at shoulder level, and we're pushing out in front of us. So kind of keeping my elbows about shoulder height, my hands or wrists are in front of my elbows, and I'm going straight in front of my chest. I like to bring a little bit of extra push together when I get into this position. That gets my shoulder blades moving a little bit. So the back of my shoulder blades are kind of coming forward around my chest just to get a little extra push, and then we're coming back into our starting position. So this one we can do either with no resistance. We can use our dowel. So this helps us just kind of get that movement. Might not necessarily get our extra scapular protraction, which is the fancy word for bringing our shoulder blades forward, but it does help, again, if I've got one arm that's a little bit weaker. So say my left arm is weak and my right arm is a little bit stronger, I can use my right arm to push that dowel out, and my left arm is kind of going for the ride. I'm still going to try and use that left arm as much as possible, but for the most part, the right arm is going to do the work. This also is a way that we can use our TheraBand. So for this, I like to secure it behind my chair. I can hold on to it with both hands, or if I have a loop in it, I can always tie that loop or put the loop on the end of my dowel so that I can still use the dowel for the resistance. There's not necessarily a reason why you would want to do one versus the other, except if you wanted to be able to get that extra protraction in your shoulder blades. So again, the movement is going to be starting about shoulder height. If this is uncomfortable, come down, because some people's shoulders, this is not a good position for you. You're more than welcome to come down a little bit so that your elbows aren't as high. Still bringing your arms in front of you and then back nice and slow. So especially when we're using the resistance band, we don't want to let the band pull us back. I always tell people, if you want to make your muscles work, the elastic band doesn't need to get any stronger. So just being aware of that, trying to keep control of it. And then also when we're done, if this is uncomfortable, especially if one arm is more sore than the other, I might just kind of let go with one hand first rather than bringing both arms up. So just being aware of your own shoulder. If you have to, you just drop it all together and somebody can pick it up for you. Not a huge deal. So generally, I like to do the chest press with a TheraBand for my resistance. The muscles that we're working are going to be our pectoral muscles, which are right from our shoulder across our chest into our sternum, the breastbone. So The other one that I like to do is called horizontal abduction, which just means that I'm moving my arms away from my body in the horizontal plane, so directly in front of me. So this one, with my band, I'm going to start with my hands kind of in front of me. This is about shoulder height. So my arms are straight out from my shoulder, my elbow is straight, my wrist is straight. I don't necessarily want my wrists up or down. I'm going to keep them somewhat straight. So we're going to start. Band is wrapped around my hands so that I can keep good resistance and pull on it. And we're just bringing our arms out and then back together nice and slow. So this one is working on the muscles in between our shoulder blades. This will be our middle traps, rhomboid muscles. These are really important postural muscles. So you want to really make sure that our shoulder blades are moving more than necessarily just our shoulders. So we're getting those shoulder blades pulled together and then back away. To do it without resistance is going to be the same idea. Still going to start with the arms roughly shoulder height. Again, if that's uncomfortable, bring your arms down fine, and then bringing them out and together. I don't need to bring my arm out any further than straight out from my body. I don't need to bring it all the way back here. Whether I have a resistance band or not, this is going to be as far as I'm going to go with the resistance band. To be able to get that resistance close and have that resistance here, once I get here, it's kind of stretched to its limit, so I can't necessarily go all the way out to that directly out from my body. That's fine because this is giving me more resistance throughout. So don't feel like you need to be able to go all the way out if you have the resistance. Going out as far as you can until that band feels like it's pretty much at its limit, because you're better off getting the resistance early and through that initial part of the movement rather than getting that full range of motion. The next one we're going to do is our bicep curls. So this will be our standard up and down. Again, with a free weight dumbbell, it's going to look like that. We can have the ankle weight on our wrist, works just fine too. Or if we're using the TheraBand, we're going to kind of hold the band with one hand. I'm going to take my other hand and secure it on my leg. I like to have it secured on the leg that's on the same side. So I'm doing my right arm, so my left hand is going to hold the band against my right thigh. This is just so that I can get a little bit more of that straight line of pull. So up and back down. So true biceps, bicep brachii is going to be palm up towards the ceiling. You can do thumb up. This is going to be working on a little bit more of our brachialis. You can also do palm down. Okay. You're going to work on different muscles in your forearm depending on how your hand position is. All of them are still going to get at least a little bit of biceps, but we're going to get the most isolated bicep if we're just going palm up. Okay. Without the resistance or with the dumbbell, I like to really make sure I've got the full range. So I like to start with my elbow straight, bringing it all the way up and all the way back down. When I have the resistance band, if I'm securing it on my leg, I can still bring my arm down, but I'm not necessarily going to get the resistance until I'm here. So that's part of the reason why I'm going to really make sure I'm as tight as possible towards the beginning, so I can get resistance as soon as I start the movement. But I also might not necessarily be getting that full range there. It's not necessarily a huge deal. If you feel like you still want to get strength through there, you're more than welcome to work on that lower range. So you also can secure your band. You can tie it in a knot around your armrest. We can still secure it in our hand. I can do my thumb up, I can do my palm up, or I can do my palm down. Okay. The angle of pull is going to be slightly different. It's slightly behind me. Again, not necessarily wrong, just a different way to do it. Whatever feels more comfortable for you and feels like you get the most resistance, but you can still do it. For our triceps, this one, I like to have one hand securing at my breastbone. So I've got my one hand on my sternum. This is the hand that's going to be anchoring. The other hand that's going to be my working hand is going to be starting up here, and it's almost at my shoulder height, almost in front of my shoulder, okay? Because the movement itself is going to be straightening out the elbow, hoping that the band doesn't pop again, and bringing our arm back up nice and straight and slow, okay? So this is to get our triceps working. For this one, our triceps, it doesn't necessarily matter how you have your palm because this muscle doesn't go all the way down into our wrist, so it's not affected by it. So I usually do my thumb up mostly because, especially with the band, that's the easiest way for me to hold on to it. If I'm using a dumbbell, this is all bicep, I'm not getting that tricep movement. So if I'm gonna be using a free weight, whether it's the ankle weight on my wrist or a dumbbell, I wanna make sure that I'm getting that resistance throughout. So for this, you're better off doing more of an overhead if I'm doing the free weight, okay? Depending on how flexible my shoulder is, I might be bringing my arm up so that my elbow is almost at my head, or it might be a little bit more in front of me, okay? That's assuming that you have enough range of motion to get your arm up there. If you don't, you're gonna be better off using a resistance band and hoping that it doesn't pop on you. The next one that we're gonna do is our shoulder flexion. So this will be bringing our arm up in front of us. So we wanna make sure with flexion, true flexion, we're coming straight from our shoulder in front of our body. For abduction, which will be the next one we're gonna be doing, true abduction is to the side of our body. We also have what we call scaption, which means that we're slightly between those two. So it's about 40 degrees. So kind of bringing your arm at an angle. A lot of the time, especially abduction, if that's an uncomfortable position for you to bring your arm up, this scaption puts our joint in a little bit better of a position, so we tend to be able to do that movement a little bit more freely without having that pain. So if you find that going out to the side is too uncomfortable for you to move your arm, or you're really only able to bring it just a few inches up before it starts hurting, try the scaption and see if you can get that up higher without having the pain. And if so, go ahead and do it in that position. And eventually you can try and start working towards the true abduction. But again, just being aware that the positioning of your shoulder, it will be affected a little bit. It might be more uncomfortable. So for our flexion, we're just going to be bringing our arm up in front of us and back down. Any shoulder movement, flexion, scaption, and abduction, I want my thumb facing up. Again, this helps to get my shoulder in a good position to be able to have a little bit more range of motion without getting stuck pushing on the tendon and getting painful. So even a healthy shoulder, I want to make sure that my thumb stays up during this. So if I'm using the dumbbell, I'm going to keep my thumb kind of up. I will kind of keep a loose grasp so that I'm holding it, but I'm not necessarily squeezing it. That just helps me to remember to keep my thumb up versus this position here. Okay. I also don't like going overhead unless you have to. So unless you need to be able to do things overhead for like work, generally speaking, it's a lot of increased pressure on the joint. So I avoid it when we're doing the exercises. I would rather do overhead range of motion is fine, but if we're doing any resistance, I aim for just shoulder height. If there's pain, we only go as far as you can without pain. So just being aware of that. Even with a healthy shoulder, I'm going to stop at shoulder height, especially when I'm doing it for resistance. So, longer. For the resistance band, because this one's very long, I'm going ahead and stepping on it. But again, you can do the anchoring with your hand. You can also kind of tie it against the leg, whatever you prefer. I like using loops because that means that I don't have to grasp. And again, sometimes when we're grasping, it makes it a little harder to remember thumb staying up towards the ceiling. So for this one, I'm always gonna start with my arms straight because I don't want to start bent, and keeping my elbow bent makes a much different exercise. So I want to keep my elbows straight. So the first thing I'm gonna do is push my elbows straight, make sure my thumb is facing to the ceiling, and then I'm gonna bring my arm up, shoulder height or below, and down nice and slow. Also, if you're watching, I want to try and make sure that I'm staying up straight. So for me, that's easy because my back doesn't bend. However, if you're having problems staying upright, you can go ahead and lean back against the chair to do this. This will make it a little bit easier for you. Just being aware that we still only want to go as far as shoulder height. We do want to try and keep our shoulder blades back a little bit. So for me, I find it easier to remember to keep my shoulder blades back if I'm sitting unsupported versus leaning back on the chair. So either way is fine as long as you're really making sure that you're keeping control of those muscles there. The fascia, same idea. Up in front of me, down nice and slow. And then abduction will be out to the side, thumb still facing up. If I'm doing it with the resistance band, again, I'm going to go ahead and anchor it under my feet because this particular one is a little bit long. So I'm going to go up to the side, back down nice and slow. If that's uncomfortable, I can come into that scaption range. Okay. There. Facing that way, it's gonna look kind of like that. So this one, the shoulder really needs to make sure that it's back. Tends to, I've got a bad thing here on that side, so I really want to make sure my shoulder blade is back. That's going to help get the joint in the good position to be able to maintain without necessarily impinging. So. So for the active assisted, again, if I had one arm that's a little bit weaker, so say my right arm has the movement to be able to go up to the side, but I don't necessarily have enough strength to do it with against gravity here, I can use a dowel. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and grasp it so that palm is touching it, thumb is going to be facing towards the end. I can rest my thumb on the end of it to help remind me of that, because as I bring that arm up, my thumb is going to be staying facing up. Okay, so for this, I still want to make sure that I'm trying to start the movement with my right arm, but my left arm is going to give a little extra push. So if I'm not quite strong enough to be able to bring that arm up, I can use the dowel to give a little extra help. Okay. For flexion in front of us, it's going to be the same idea, but this time, because I still want my thumb facing up, I'm going to be grasping the dowel a little bit differently. So the pointy end is going to kind of go into my palm, and I'm going to be kind of lightly touching it because I want to make sure that I keep that position of my hand. And then again, my left arm is going to be helping to bring it up, and my right arm is kind of going for the ride. Okay, so it doesn't matter if my dowel moves as long as my arm kind of stays in the same position. If I'm doing it strictly for the range of motion, I'm going to be pushing from the bottom and bringing that arm up. This is fine too. So this would be if I want to get my shoulder moving, but it's not necessarily working on the strength. So this is purely to get flexion, range of motion, versus this is going to be more of that active assisted. So actively trying to raise it while the other hand is assisting. Same with going to the side, I can use my left hand to help. Depending on how much my left hand is helping versus my right hand doing it, is whether it's going to be more of a strengthening versus a range of motion. So again, even with these, I don't necessarily want to go above shoulder height unless I am strictly doing it for the range of motion rather than doing it for the strengthening exercise.